Hi. Who uses reactquery and likes it? OK, so what are you doing here? So my name is Adam Klein, co-founder and CTO of Covver, which is an early stage startup in the employee engagement and customer engagement space. We're building a very awesome project from scratch using reactquery. I'm a proud father of two, a husband of one, which brings me to the fact that I like dad jokes. I'm also WebGDE, previously co-founder of 500 Tech and author of Reusable.js, which is a state management library, a small state management library for React. So let's admit, half of the time we work as front-end developers, we write data fetching from the server, state management. And when we talk about state management, we think about a single source of truth. All of the state of our application, whether it's client or server, is kept in the same place. But not all states are created equally. For example, client state is synchronous. It's up to date. It's complete. It's consistent, usually. And usually, it cannot be changed elsewhere. And server state is exactly the opposite. It's asynchronous. It's stale. We got it from the server, and it might be already updated on the server. It's usually incomplete. We get just part of the data. It could be inconsistent between different locations in our application. And it can be changed elsewhere. And server state, as we know it, needs a lot of special care. We need to handle loading states. We need to handle errors. We need to deduplicate requests. If we need the same request from different parts of the application, we don't want to make them twice. We want to make them once. We need to refetch stuff from the server when they change. We need to handle pagination, virtual scroll, et cetera, et cetera. And we also want to have better user experience in our application. For example, if we got something for the server, we want to cache it and don't refetch it after 2 seconds, for example, or refetch it in the background. And sometimes we want to prefetch stuff we know that the user is going to load. And we want to handle parsed data and ideally do optimistic updates to give a very good user experience. And it's pretty much the same for all applications. It's not, I didn't describe here something that's very specific to your business logic. You got to have this meme in a talk. But why? Why do we keep re-implementing the same thing? Because state management. Because people like me stood on stages like this and told you how to manage your server state inside your Redux or Mobix or whatever, which is one strategy you can take. I'm here to show you a different strategy and tell you that you don't have to. You can use libraries like reactquery or Apollo client or other libraries that use the same methodology. And the basic architecture is to treat your server as the single source of truth for your server data. And what reactquery does, it just keeps a local cache of parts of the data that you fetched from the server. It lets you subscribe to the data, and it does all the heavy lifting for you. And you manage your client state in libraries that are meant to manage synchronous state, like useState, context, Redux, Mobix, whatever. And you can combine them in your components or your custom hooks. And it doesn't matter what API you use. You can use REST, GraphQL, use Axios, Fetch, WebSocket. Whatever that returns a promise with the data, reactquery can handle it, and it handles everything around it. So loading states, error handling, caching, deduplication, whatever we discussed, you get it out of the box. And with very little effort and very good guides and documentation, you can achieve better user experience. OK, you ready for some live coding? I have to be ready. You don't have to be ready. OK, so here we have a very simple app that displays notes. We have the notes in the sidebar. We have the nodes here in the main page. We can navigate, drill down to a specific node. We fetch it from the server. And let's refresh to see what happens. So we load the nodes. You can already see some bugs. For example, why do we need to reload the nodes twice from the server? Because we use them here and here, but we could have just loaded them once. Also, when we navigate, for example, to the first node, and then back to all nodes, we keep reloading from the server, even though we just loaded it like a second ago. We can also add a new node. And as you can see, we also have a bug because we didn't refetch the list of nodes from the server. So let's look at the code before we refactor it to use a React query. So we have the nodes component, which is the main page. We have the sidebar component. Both of them use this hook. And this hook just fetches from the server. And it handles all of the loading state, error handling, etc. So you probably know this code. You probably do similar stuff in your code. You have a loading state, an error state, the actual state from the server. When you start, you set the loading to true. You do the fetching. You set the data. You set the loading to false. And if there's an error, you set an error. There's a bug here. Why is there a bug here? Because we don't spend months on months writing data fetching from the server, like the people who work on React query, or the person. And we didn't notice that actually our state is inconsistent, because the initial state, we don't have any nodes, but we're also not loading anything. So what is this state? It's not a real state. Also, when we get back the data from the server, we set the nodes, but there's a very small moment in time where we're still loading. So we didn't handle it well. It's okay. I wrote code like this the same, which leads to very strange bugs that we need to bypass. For example, here I have if is loading, or there is still no data. Why? It should be a consistent state. So let's see how we can do this better with React query. First of all, to use React query, you need the query client provider, which I already have in my application. And you have to use query. This is how you use React query. And you pass in two arguments. The first one is the cache key. This is how we can invalidate stuff later on. So let's call this nodes. And this is also how React query nodes to deduplicate requests, which basically means if we do the same request in two parts in the application, it will only be called once. The second parameter is just a function that returns promise. So we don't need all of this. We don't need all of this. Basically, we just need to return a promise that returns the data. And React query handles everything else. What we get back from use query is error, load, is loading, data, and some other stuff. Let's just map it to what we had before. Some live coding magic. Let's see what happens when we go to the home page and refresh. Don't blink. We have one query to the server, and the UI loads in one shot. Also, if we navigate to a node and we go back to all nodes, you can see that it takes it from the cache, but it also refetches from the server in the background. So we get really good user experience just out of the box. Also, we can remove this bypass of the bugs that we had, because we don't have these inconsistent states of the server state. If it's loading, there's no data, and if there's data, it's not loading. Let's do the same for a single node. So when we fetch a single node, we have an ID. So we do pretty much the same. we return use query. But we can't just pass in nodes, because it's not the whole nodes. We have to pass an array. And reactquery uses a hierarchical, I hate that word, a cache keys, which lets you invalidate stuff. For example, later we can invalidate everything that starts with nodes. So all of the lists and the single use cases. A very good practice is to put all of the lists that you fetch in something like this, and all of the single nodes with something like this. Why is that good? Because later on we can add, for example, if we have filters, we can add here filters, and it helps with managing keys. So let's just remove all the unnecessary code. We just need to return this. It's going too smooth. Maybe I'll put a bug just to make it interesting. You think it will work? I have a bug, an intentional bug. It doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? It's because I didn't map the data to node. Now it will work. And we can remove this. And I have another bug, which I didn't expect, which is probably I'm using the wrong ID. Right. And we need to pass the fetch node. Okay. Yay. So now when I navigate to all nodes and back to one node, it just shows it immediately, which is great. Let's add one more thing of user experience. We are loading stuff in the background, and I think it's nice to show the user that something is happening. Data might change. If we get new data, then it's better to show the user that we are doing something in the background. So reactquery, I'm going to show you like small bits of what reactquery offers. There's much more than what I'm showing you. I prepared a component in advanced, which is called fetching indicator. And it's using a hook from reactquery, which is called useIsFetching. Basically, is there anything fetching in our application? You can use this hook. And then you get this nice indicator that says, yes, we're showing you the data from the local cache, but we're also doing something in the background, so be prepared if things change on the screen. Okay. So the next thing we want to show is a mutation. So when we add a new node. So to use a mutation, you use mutation, obviously. And you don't need any cache keys because you're just changing stuff. You're not fetching and storing it in reactquery's cache. So you can just pass in the create node. Let's remove all of this unnecessary code. And what we get back more unnecessary code. What we get back is we can get back the data, but we can also get back is a function called mutate or mutateAsync. So we will use mutateAsync. It depends if you want to do like an async await flow or call the mutate and wait until the new data gets back from the hook. So I prefer doing async flows with async await. I find it more convenient, but you can also go the other way and say, let's mutate, forget about it, and do some kind of use effect on the data that changes. It's also a reasonable strategy. And since I prepared the code to be very similar to reactquery, now it should just work. So we call create node, which is mutateAsync. We change the data on the server, we get back the response, and we navigate to the new page. So let's add a new node, which is nice, but we still have this bug where we didn't refetch the nodes in the sidebar. So now there are basically 3 ways to accomplish this. Let's start with the simplest one and the safest one, which is to just say the server is the single source of truth. We have an onSuccess event handler in reactquery. Let's just invalidate the queries that we know that are already stale, right? We just added a node, so the list of nodes we can refetch from the server. So we need to get a query client from use query client, and we can call query client dot invalidate queries and pass in the cache key. So now it will invalidate all of the queries that start from the cache key nodes. We can also pass in exact true if you want just a specific cache key. In this case, it's okay to just invalidate everything. Sometimes we want to be defensive and say we prefer to do a lot of refetching and not expose ourselves to inconsistent UIs. But obviously, you need to be very careful with that because you might cause a lot of refetching from the server. So it's something that you need to be mindful about. This is obviously the safest way to do it. And it will only refetch the query if there is one component that's observing it on the screen. If you invalidate a query and there's no component that's using it, reactquery won't refetch it from the server. So now if we add a new component, we refetch it from the server, and it should have worked, and it doesn't work. Invalidate queries. Yeah, it worked. It worked, but we can do it better. Because if you think about it, we have 2 round trips to the server. We create a new node, we get back the newly created node, and then we go and fetch the entire list of nodes again. If we want to take it a step further and do a little bit of coding, we can set the actual query cache of the list on the client side. So basically what we can do is call query client dot set query data. So reactquery exposes the data for us. We can get it, we can set it, we can play with it, and we can achieve very good user experience using that approach. So we get an updater function, and we basically say, let's take the old nodes, add the new node. So we perform the mutation on the server, and then we perform a similar mutation on the client to get better user experience. But we still invalidate the queries because the server might have done other stuff as well, like calculate other columns or change stuff that happens in the background. So it's always a good approach to refetch stuff from the server. Again, be mindful about loading the server with requests that you don't really have to do. So don't just do it because I told you so. Think if you really need to do it, and then invalidate the queries. So now when we add a new node, we get it back, and I think I need to refresh. And we immediately, what? Oh, right. Thank you. We're hiring. You don't have to spend a lot of money on hiring developers. You just need one good joke. I gave up. We're hiring. I think one refresh might solve it. Ah, I know why. No one saw this? Come on. You're not listening? Last chance. Last chance or I quit programming. Thank God. Okay. So that's a better way to do it. There's even a better way to do it, which I'm not going to demonstrate live, which is optimistic updates. It requires a bit more code, but reactquery gives you a very good guide on how to do it. What I like about reactquery is the stuff that we always say, I really want to get to doing optimistic updates, and I really want to get to doing refetching and caching, and we never get to it because it's complicated. And with reactquery, it's really simple, and you have guides how to do it. And we do it in our company, and it works really, really well. I think one last thing that I'm going to show you is placeholder data. So a lot of times we fetch a list from the server. We don't get all the data, right? We want to keep our responses compact. So for example, here we just fetch the title of the note. We don't fetch the entire description. But it would be nice that if we click this, we can already show the title of the note, right? We already have it in our cache. So to do it with reactquery, you have something called placeholder. So when we fetch a single note, we can say placeholder data. And here we can use the query data of the list of notes. So let's get the query client here. Use note. And let's call query client.get query data. This time pass in the correct cache key. And find the note with this ID, which means that when we fetch this query, we don't even have a loading state. Immediately, reactquery will return the placeholder data. It will also refetch in the background. And it will give us not just isloading, but isfetching. So if we want to know if it's fetching in the background, we can use isfetching. But if we want to know if the data is ready, then we use isloading. So it's another thing that reactquery gives us. And now when I click note, we immediately see the title, and we fetch the entire note in the background. The only thing left to do is to show some kind of loading or skeleton object. And when the data arrives, then it is displayed. Cool. Last thing. We really want to know what's going on under the hood, right? Where is the data? What data do we have? What queries are we doing? Let's use reactquery devtools, which is this nice little flower in the bottom left. And you can actually see all of the queries that we are currently observing in the screen, their status, whether they are fetching, loading, stale. By the way, everything is configurable in reactquery. You can give it the expiration time, the staleness time, whether to refetch stuff when you focus on the window again, which is very useful for dashboards. It can give you this feeling of like live data. Sometimes people look and say, oh, you have like a WebSocket. And no, just reactquery. You can do refetch on window focus, and it feels like everything is live. So here we can explore the data that reactquery keeps inside. We can invalidate stuff. We can refetch stuff. We can see all the cache keys, so it's really good for debugging. Awesome. OK, so that was a good ride. Had some bugs. You helped me solve them. So to summarize what we get from reactquery, first of all, a simple, consistent, tested, TypeScript-ready library for managing your data strategy, data fetching from the server. You get great user experience out of the box with reduced bandwidth because of deduping requests. You get a lot of control on how you do the data strategy. If you just want to do it quickly, then it works. And if you want to fine-tune it, you have all the tools to do it. You have recipes for more advanced UX workflows like infinite scrolling, pagination, optimistic updates, etc., etc. And you get to write much, much, much less code. And you have a good reason to refactor parts of your application. That's it. Thank you very much. Bon appétit.